Today, I'll show you how to make an easy Edwardian corset cover without a sewing pattern. This style of corset cover is made of embroidered fabric with a ribbon run through the embroidery along the neckline. I've sometimes seen this style of garment also called a camisole. The American System of Dressmaking, published in 1909, says that simple corset covers are especially designed for embroidery flouncing like this. Apparently, this style of corset cover offers insufficient protection, but it's exactly what I needed for some light fluff under my Edwardian shirtwaists. This simple corset cover is based on examples from the early 1900s and 19-teens. Its versatile low profile and characteristic narrow straps make it ideal for wearing with evening gowns and sheer garments. You can make this corset cover from embroidered fabric with a strip of lace attached to it, or, like me, an old curtain valance. The embroidered fabric of the valance was about 9 inches tall, which was just right for my size. I first detached the embroidered fabric from the curtain rod pocket and removed the original gathering stitches. Because the curtain I was using was torn in some places, I was limited on how wide I could make my corset cover. I cut a strip of fabric 35 inches wide, which gave me 3 inches of ease in the finished corset cover. I recommend you cut a strip of fabric at least 5 inches wider than your bust measurement for a comfortable fit. At this point, I tried on the fabric strip so that I could mark the placement of the waistline and side seams. We want the back of the corset cover to be shorter than the front, so that there isn't unnecessary volume and bulk at the back and sides. I'm particularly short-waisted, so I really don't want extra fabric drooping back there. One of my favorite sewing tools is a loop of elastic that I made to help me mark the waistline on garments. I adjust the mock-up using chalk and pins to mark where the waistline and side seams will end up. The next step is to cut your long strip of fabric into 3 pieces so that you can assemble the side seams. Each front panel of the corset cover will be 11 inches wide. Ideally, this should have been a smidge wider, but I was working within the limitations of repurposed materials. Next, I pinned my 3 pieces of fabric wrong sides together because I'll be assembling this garment with French seams. To create the side seams, I marked 1.5 inches at the waistline of the corset cover and 1/4 inch at the top, then connected both spots with a chalk line to create a tapered, triangular seam. The depth of this seam will vary based on the shape of your body, so try out a few different measurements before making your seams. To make French seams, I stitched along the chalk line and then pressed open the seam allowances. I trimmed down the seam allowances, then folded the fabric to enclose the seam allowances, pressed, and stitched again. French seams are great for sheer and embroidered fabrics like this because the extra row of stitches helps keep fabric from fraying and encloses all the raw edges. Now we're going back to the waistline markings that we made earlier. On my body, the back waistline hit at 3 inches above the bottom edge of the fabric. At the side seams, I drew a line 2 inches above the edge of the fabric. Then I folded the garment in half and connected my markings, drawing a line that tapered to the middle of the front panels. I cut off the excess fabric under the chalk line, leaving about a 1/2 inch of allowance. It's time to finish off the front edges of the corset cover by creating a button placket. This is a great project for using up small scraps of fabric, so I looked in my scrap bin for pieces of white cotton. For my placket, I cut out 2 rectangles that measure 2 inches wide and 10 inches long, and this includes a 1/4 inch of seam allowance on all sides. I pinned 1 placket piece to the front edge, making sure that the side seam was facing me. Like in my Edwardian apron tutorial, the placket will first be stitched to the wrong side of the garment and then flipped to the right side and top stitched for a pretty finish. I pressed the seam allowances toward the placket. Then I flipped the garment right side up and pressed down 1/4 inch on the long side of the placket. We don't need to worry about enclosing raw edges at the bottom of the placket because that will be covered up by the waistband. But at the top of the placket, I fold in the extra material and press it flat with an iron. The placket then gets folded in half, lengthwise, and pressed again before stitching. I lowered the stitch length on my sewing machine for the top stitching of the placket. Not only does a shorter stitch length give you more precision, it also looks closer to sewing machine stitches from the early 20th century. When I get to the top of the placket, I very carefully raise the presser foot while keeping the needle in the fabric so that I can pivot the fabric around the needle. Then I top stitch down the folded side of the placket for a decorative touch. I attach the other placket piece to the other front edge of the corset cover in the same way. Next, we're going to gather the bottom edge of the corset cover. The gathering will provide some fullness over the bust area and contribute to that typical Edwardian pigeon breast silhouette. On my sewing machine, I sew 2 parallel rows of gathering stitches along the bottom front edges, starting the stitches about 6 inches away from the placket. I pull on the bobbin threads to cinch the gathers. The waistband will be a long rectangle of fabric that's 2 inches wide and long enough to wrap around your waist. Since I was working with scraps, I didn't have a piece of fabric long enough, so I sewed 2 rectangles of fabric together. It makes no difference if the waistband has a center back seam. Like my plackets, my waistband has a 1/4 inch of seam allowance included in the measurements, and it's also made from white cotton fabric. We will attach the waistband the same way we attach the plackets. First, match up the center back of the corset cover with the center back of the waistband, making sure the seams of the corset cover are facing you. On my waistband, I marked with pins where the front edges of the corset cover will overlap. I lined up those front edges with the pins and adjusted the gathers to fit. I gently eased the waistband strip around the curved bottom edge of the corset cover. Placing the pins horizontally helps me match up the curved fabric to the straight fabric. I stitched the waistband to the corset cover with a 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Pressing the seams after stitching them is really important because it helps set the stitches in the fabric and helps prevent puckers and wrinkles. You don't need a high quality iron with all the bells and whistles included. Just set a standard iron to the correct heat setting for your fabric and firmly press it against the fabric. I also like to press down the wrong side and the right side of the garment to make sure I'm not getting any accidental puckers or folds. Next, I press down a 1/4 inch along the long side of the waistband. I fold the waistband lengthwise and match up the folded seam allowance to the first seam and pin the waistband in place. The corset cover should now be right side up so that the waistband can be top stitched from the right side of the garment, just like we did with the placket. You'll notice I left extra seam allowance at the center front waistband, and that's because I want to offset the button fastening on the waistband so that it doesn't interfere with the hooks on my corset. I looked through my stash for suitable buttons and decided on some antique porcelain buttons. This type of button was commonly used on Victorian and Edwardian undergarments because it was strong enough to withstand the harsh laundering techniques of the time. This particular style of button is often referred to as a pie crust button, which is great for me because I love making and eating pie. Original corset covers appear to have few buttons, which makes sense because for the most part they weren't tightly fitting garments and as such didn't need extra fasteners. I decided to place a button at the top of the placket, another one on the waistband, and 2 buttons placed 3 inches apart on the placket. For hand-sewn buttonholes, I find that regular cotton embroidery floss is easy to use and produces a pretty, sturdy buttonhole. I untwist 2 strands of embroidery floss and pass them through a block of beeswax to strengthen the threads. You can see how I make hand-sewn buttonholes on my Victorian drawers video, which I'll link down below. Since I was using repurposed materials for the rest of the corset cover, I wanted to use repurposed materials for the straps as well. I had a length of gathered lace in my stash that looked fairly historically accurate in its texture, color, and size. The only problem was that it was pre-gathered to a strip of mesh and looked pretty clunky. So I used my seam ripper to carefully remove the mesh strip and the gathering. I love how the lace looks without the gathers. Keep an open mind when looking through your supplies. You may have something that will work perfectly for a project with just a bit of tweaking. I pinned the lace to the top edge of the corset cover and tested the placement and length of the straps before cutting the lace. I sewed the lace straps on with my sewing machine, sewing a little box shape around the perimeter of the lace. I set the stitch length to the smallest size so that the stitches would hold the lace securely. On the inside of the corset cover, I folded in 1/4 inch of the lace so that no fraying, raw edges of the lace would be exposed. You can also use ribbon or a strip of fabric to make straps for a garment like this. The last step is to thread a ribbon through the embroidery along the top of the corset cover so that it can be cinched to fit around you. I used some blue silk ribbon from my stash, but as it's silk, I'll have to remove it whenever I wash the corset cover. Adding and removing the ribbon is easy with the use of a bodkin or blunt needle. You can often find this kind of large, blunt needle in the standard needle assortments at craft stores. This tool is also useful for lacing up stays and inserting cords or elastic into channels. I'm so pleased with how this project turned out. I think the delicate details like the ribbon, lace, and embroidered fabric help this corset cover look historically accurate. I also really enjoyed the challenge of using repurposed and secondhand materials, and I had a lot of fun creating a garment without a pattern or detailed instructions. When researching Edwardian corset covers, I found a lot of extant garments that were shaped like this, and I'm sure the simple design was appreciated by home sewers. This style would have also been really easy to mass produce in factories. I'm excited to wear this with my Edwardian outfits, but it's also the perfect summertime blouse to wear with a straw hat and flowy skirt. Please let me know in the comments below if you've ever made Edwardian undergarments. I'm really curious to know what your experience was. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.